Perfect. So, welcome to our seminar, Get Hired, Resumes and Interview Tips That Work with Black Engineer of Canada. Our guest speaker today is Ms. Paula Brown. I am your host, Sayede Bayo. We are going to start with an acknowledgement of territory and history. So, we acknowledge that we are residing and working on the traditional and unceded territory of Indigenous peoples who have cared for this land for generations. We honor their enduring connection to this place and commit to learning from the example of respect, reciprocity, and sustainability. We also acknowledge the ongoing legacy of slavery, colonialism, and systemic anti-Black racism in Canada. We recognize the contributions of Black communities, past and present, who have built and shaped this country, often in the face of exclusion and discrimination. We are committed to actively dismantling anti-Black racism and supporting equity, justice, and empowerment for all marginalized communities. I am now giving the floor to Ms. Paula Brown.
Hello. So good afternoon. So I'm just gonna get started here. Just give me one moment for me to share my screen. Okay, everyone can see me, see the presentation, hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, so good afternoon, everyone. So as was mentioned, today's talk, I will say a conversation titled Get Hired, Resume and Interview Tips That Work. And I'll be your speaker today, Paula Brown. So before I get started, just want to tell you a little bit about myself so that we're not strangers. So first off, I am of science, not an engineer, but did do science. I'm a graduate of the Applied Chemistry and Biology program at what used to be called Ryerson. It is now Toronto Metropolitan University. So I graduated in 2005. So after that, I worked in the private sector for several years. So I worked at two particular pharmaceutical companies, and I held titles such as QC chemist, raw materials chemist. I did a little bit of research and development. After that, I transitioned to the public service, and there I worked for the Ontario Public Service, and I started off as a toxicology technologist. That title's changed a few times since then. And I had a stint as a lab manager. I also managed a business unit. I did equity, diversity, and inclusion work. And then I also managed a chemistry section as a manager. And currently I'm managing the toxicology section as a manager. And this is all at the Center of Forensic Sciences. So why did I tell you all of that? Well, because I've been a lot of places, and in that, I have experience transitioning to different types of roles, both in a management capacity and also as a staff member. So I'm going to share some of my just experiences and knowledge that I've gained from that. So besides all the work stuff, I very involved, I will say, in I donate a lot of my time, I guess you could call it. So I mentor a lot of people. I'm in several different programs as a mentor. And I just think it's important that as we navigate our career journey, we kind of share our knowledge that we get along the way with others. And that's kind of why I'm here today as well. So that's a little bit about me. So what are we going to be talking about today? So there's four main areas we're going to kind of have a conversation about. So first off, creating and polishing your resume. So that's the thing that I think feels the most daunting for people, but it really doesn't have to be. So I'm just going to share some little tips, and I won't call them tricks. We'll just call them tips on how to craft your resume to be a little bit better isn't even the right word either, but to stand out a little bit. After that, I'm going to be talking about how you can search for a job effectively, because who cares if your resume is great if you're not really applying to the right places. A little bit of tongue-tied today. Then we're going to be talking about how to perform well in the interview. And lastly, a topic that I think is a hot topic, we're just going to touch on the use of AI and how that impacts your job search and your journey. Okay, so before we get started, first off, I am not guaranteeing you anything. And I know that sounds kind of, oh, well, then why am I here? There are no guarantees. And the reason why I say that is because there's a lot of things that do affect your success in the job search. So some of these factors are what's going on in the market, for example, what industry you're applying to, who else is applying for a job, and even the time of year. So there's so many things that go into your success or your lack thereof. So it is important to know that, like, sometimes you did the best you can and you still didn't get the job. And that's okay, because there's a lot of other factors that come into play. The key here is you don't want to be your own barrier. So one of the things we will hopefully give you at the end of today are just some things that you could maybe do differently or do better that can give you the best shot when going through your career journey. So, as I said, like, even if you do everything right, sometimes you might not even land a job right away, and that's okay. The job search, the whole process takes patience, but it also takes persistence. It's important to not give up. The first no that you get, don't be like, I'm done with it. I've gotten a ton of no's in my life and I'm, still going. Sometimes the no's are the best things that could ever happen to you as well. So it's very important to always keep pushing through, even if you don't get results right away. Don't take any shortcuts. So the effort you put in is exactly what you're going to get out of it. So if you're very passive in your search and in your approach, you're probably not going to get good results. Most of us aren't lucky enough to get shoulder taps and things handed to us. So it's very important that you put in a good amount of work to be successful in your journey. And lastly, and it sounds kind of, airy-fairy, I will say, but stay positive. Easy to say, harder to do, but I truly believe that, like, your mindset does set your course and your journey. So staying positive, knowing that eventually something will work out, it makes a world of difference. If you're going into everything with I'm probably not going to get it, it's probably not going to go well, that's probably what's going to happen. So if you have a positive attitude, it does kind of give you that motivation and that energy to keep pushing. So before I continue, are there any questions? All right. Well, I can take the silence as a no. So we're going to keep going. So first off, we're going to talk about creating and polishing your resume. So there we go. So preparing your resume and looking for a job, these two things can actually happen at the same time. For the purpose of this presentation, I'm doing it first, but you kind of would be doing those simultaneously, because as I'll talk about a little bit later, you're going to want your resume to reflect the job that you're applying for. So your resume is really a dynamic document depending on what you're applying for. So these do happen kind of hand in hand in lockstep, but we're going to talk about them as two separate pieces. So first thing you're going to want to do is create sort of a master copy of your resume. So you'll do this for each type of job that you're applying for. So what I mean by master copy is one that has all of your experience in there, everything that you want to talk about. That's your master copy. Then, depending on what type of job you're applying for, what specific company, what specific role, you're going to move things around or omit them from your resume. Because really, you should have a resume that's tailored to the job that you're applying for. Now, some people will tell you, you just have one resume and you send that everywhere. That's usually not particularly successful, because the point of your resume is to say, hey, this is me and I'm a good fit for that role that you're hiring for. Something generic doesn't really speak to that. So you're really going to want to tailor your resume to those positions that you're applying for. With that, you should always have an up-to-date resume ready to go. You never know when you'll meet someone, for example, and it'll be like, hey, I've got this role that I'm really thinking you could be a good fit for. Send me your resume. You don't want to be like, oh, I need like a week to get it to you, right? It could be very time sensitive. So as you navigate through your career, it's always a good idea to revisit your resume, update your experience. So like, for example, if you land a new job, create a new resume with that job on your resume and you update it with your experiences and things that you do in that role, because you never know when something will come up and you want to be ready. It's also a good way to kind of positively reinforce yourself, looking at all that you've accomplished and updating that resume regularly. And lastly, for each role that you apply for, you can modify and tailor your resume based on what's in the job ad. So this is super, super important. When you're crafting your resume for a job, you want to kind of have them side by side. And you're going to look at, okay, these are the key competencies that are in the job ad. These are the things I have to speak to in my resume. So, for example, let's say it's a project management job, and one of the competencies are, time management or able to juggle multiple tasks. You're going to want to speak to those specifically in your resume. Proofread your resume. It's really bad when there's spelling errors and grammar errors. So spell check, grammar check. And another thing you can do is just have someone who you trust, who will be honest, who won't be like, everything is fine when they didn't look at it. Have them look at your resume, because you don't want little things like spelling errors, words that don't make sense, even formatting challenges. These are all things that kind of show that you're not paying attention to detail, which may be a very specific skill that you need to have for that particular role. So it's very important to triple check even your resume before submitting it. Avoid resumes that are really, really, really long. No one wants to read a novel. Most of the time, most of that stuff in there isn't even relevant. So succinct is good. However, a one-page resume, if you've worked for 10 years, is a little bit on the brief side because you're probably not saying enough. So 2 pages is typically the sweet spot, and that's 2 pages, regular font, not like 8-point to squeeze more stuff in and narrow margins, but like a 10 font 2-page resume is usually sufficient. Sometimes in a job ad, they do have a specification for the maximum number of pages in your resume, so be sure to not exceed that. Sometimes it's like, oh, I want to say everything I've ever done ever, so I have to make it longer. That could disqualify you, because once again, you're not paying attention to detail because it was said, hey, 2 pages or less. So you want to pay attention to those details if they're in the job ad. And lastly, you're going to want to steer clear of gimmicks and tricks. You don't need them. At the end of the day, the content of your resume, what you've actually done, that's what's important. The big thing is a picture. Don't need it. If this isn't a job where your face is what you're selling, what do you even need the picture for? It's a little gimmicky thing that people do sometimes to try to stand out, but it's really not needed. And it does kind of look like you're using that instead of your skills. Your skills should speak for themselves, and a well-crafted resume does not need any of those tricks. So your content's what's important. You don't need all these different graphics and things like that, because it can also be too busy and be a little bit it can be a little distracting if there's too much going on. So simple is great. There's a lot of resume templates that are even available that have, different color schemes and things like that. Those are fine, but you want to get away from the excessive graphics and the headshot, because they're just not necessary, at least for technical roles. If you're applying to be a model, then maybe you need the picture. But for, a role like in a science job, for example, it's not needed. So before I continue, are there any questions?
I have one question though.
Yes.
If will you be able to share the slides with the participants after the program? I was just thinking.
I could share a shortened version, I think. I typically don't share like my whole slide deck, but I can maybe put together something a little more brief to share with participants after.
That would be nice. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Oh, also, I wanted to take this opportunity to reiterate to everybody who is a participant here, please make sure that you are really noting everything that Paula is saying. It's very great information. And if you are able, also try to look at your resume at the same time and check if what is said here aligns. After the presentation, everybody will be able to come and ask some questions, and we'll be able to have a little bit of a chit chat. So thank you very much. And yeah, Paula, you can have the floor again. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. And if anybody has any questions as I'm going along, please feel free. You can throw them in the chat. You can, I don't know if I can see raised hands, but you can maybe raise your hand or just speak up. Happy to stop as we go along. Okay, so if you're applying for a job that is in your field and that aligns with your experience, this is where you're really going to want to talk about those technical pieces. You're going to want to go into the details of the, the technical aspects of these types of roles. So you're going to want to lean on your technical experience. However, if you are applying to a role that's not necessarily in your wheelhouse, it's a little bit different than your experience, you're going to approach how you speak about your experience differently. So, for example, let's say you're working in a lab. This is all your experience, lab 1, lab 2, lab 3. And then now you're applying for, let's say, a management role. Instead of talking about the things you did as a lab worker, like I'm really good at pipetting, I can run this instrument, what you're going to want to speak to is the competencies that you used as a lab tech. So, for example, project management, like if you had to do a research project, that would be project management, or the attention to detail that you'd have to have in generating data, or managing your time, having to do multiple tests. So you really want to take that experience, and instead of saying, I'm really good at doing this thing, what you're going to do is say, hey, these are the skills that I had in doing this thing that are applicable to this role that's not necessarily in the same field. Why this is important is as you sort of navigate through your career, you may not always be in the same industry. You may want to jump to a different industry, jump to a different type of work. Some people think, oh my gosh, my background is only science. I can only do science. That's not the case. You can take that science knowledge that you have and reframe it and make it palatable for roles that aren't in science. So that's just an example of that. I think this is the hardest piece for people because people tend to want to say all the stuff that they did in this role, like all the very, technical minutia that they have done. But if you're speaking to someone who knows nothing about what you're talking about, it is meaningless. So part of this as well is kind of knowing your audience, right? So if you're applying to a role that isn't sort of in the same realm, you're going to want to reframe how you speak about your experience so that someone who doesn't have that experience can know what you're talking about. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is go through sort of the different sections that you typically want to include in your resume. So I've broken it up into sort of two buckets. So one type of resume is when you have work experience, but then the reality also is that if you're, say, fresh out of school and you haven't worked, there's going to be a different format that you're going to want to use in crafting your resume. So first, I'm going to start with the different sections that you're going to want to have in your resume if you have experience, and then we're going to get into the sections that you're going to want to include if you're, let's say, fresh out of school. So in general, this is just sort of a really, really stripped down basic. This is what you can include. The order is pretty much the order you want to go in, but I've seen variations of this, but this is just the typical one that I think stands out the most. So obviously, you're going to want to have your contact information. That's first. You're going to want to have a summary of your skills, your work experience, any volunteer experience that you've had, your educational background, any credentials or certifications that you may have, any professional development like courses or programs that you've taken, and just a statement saying that your references are available upon request. And then lastly, you'll have a footer with just whose resume it is and the number of pages. So we're going to go through each section. And as I mentioned before, if you do have any questions, please feel free to stop me and happy to dive into things a little bit deeper if you like. So the first section is your contact information. So this is usually typically at the top of your resume. So here you're going to include your name, your email address, and your phone number. So I know classically back in the day, those of us who are a little bit older, you'd put your home address on the resume. This is when you had like paper and you'd walk it into a company. You don't really see that anymore. There are some reasons as to why this happens. One is discrimination, I will say. Certain addresses, certain areas have a bad reputation, and people's unconscious bias or conscious bias may be like, oh, this person lives in this area, I'm not interested. So that's a way to remove bias. Second off, do you really want everybody just knowing where you live? Not necessarily, right? It's not necessary. But you can include it, but it's not needed. But for sure, you're going to want information in order for whoever is hiring to contact you. So email address and phone number is usually standard. With the email address, you're going to want an email address that's grown up. You're not going to want one that you had when you were 12 that has swearing in it, maybe inappropriate or strange. You might want to just set up an actual, just even, I'll say, a professional email address, your initials, your name and your last name, something like that to put on your resume, because it just looks a little bit more professional when you do that. And this is, as I said, usually at the top of the very top of your document. Next section in your resume is going to be your summary of skills. Now, this isn't just every skill you've ever gotten since you started walking as a baby. The skills you're going to want to put here are skills that are relevant to the role that you're applying for. So, for example, let's use a project management example again. If this is a project management job, you're going to want to highlight skills that are relevant to project management. So, your time management, working with a team, technologies that you're adept with, things of that nature. And you're just going to put those short sentences or point form right at the top of your resume. Any questions?
I actually have a question for you in regards of the address.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was a very interesting point about not putting the address due to discrimination.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add something also to the discussion, because I've heard in my career people saying that you want to put at least an address or something that can be tied to the place where you want to be working, because sometimes HRs can be like, okay, if that person is the job is located in Toronto, but that person is located in Montreal, and
Yes.
maybe we don't want to do relocation, we don't want to pay for relocation, so they might pass the candidate for something like that. I just wanted to ask if it was maybe possible, if not to put the full address, maybe just to put the city. Would it be like a good alternative also, just to be able to,
Yes.
work a little bit with that?
So city, postal code even, but postal code can get you right back to the address. And that is a good point. I know, like with government jobs, for example, for some of them, you have to be within a certain distance from the office. So the challenge is that people will sometimes then get excluded, right? Like, let's say the job is in Montreal and you're in Toronto. So while the job may not relocate for you, you may want to relocate for the job. But if you've already excluded yourself by saying, I'm not there, then you don't have a shot. So that's where it's kind of, I'll say it's a little bit of preference, but you don't want to exclude yourself, because there are some people who will just relocate for work. Not necessarily that the job will pay the relocation expenses, but if it is a good enough job, it's like, hey, I live in BC, I'm moving to Toronto for this role. So it does depend. I've seen postal code, as I said, but you can look up a postal code and get an address. right? An area, at least, at minimum. So it's at the end of the day, it's not necessarily needed. And depending on the role, like if they're using a sort of an online platform to which you apply through, you're going to have to provide that information anyways. So you don't necessarily need it on the resume, I would say, but you can add it. I still see people with their home address as well. It typically doesn't exclude you, but as I said, there are instances, knowing the world that we do live in and discrimination does exist, certain areas have negative connotations attached to them. So it's like you're getting excluded right off the bat. And it's not about being dishonest about it, but it's just that, hey, I'm not going to just have your bias knock me in the face right out the door, right? Like I'm gonna remove that. But that's a great point, because it does depend on industry as well, I would say. But I know for government, as I said, you're gonna have to eventually provide your address, so you don't really need it on the resume. It's a great question, though.
All
Yeah,
right, thank you so much.
Paula, before you move ahead,
yes,
there's something I would like you to talk to, and that has to do in a way to avoid discrimination also, is to let people be aware that they could use a preferred name on their resume. If you can talk to that, that would be nice. So you don't have, in Canada, I think it's allowed for you to use a preferred name. If you feel as if your name might tend to get you discriminated and not called for an interview, you could get a preferred name. And when you get to the interview stage or to the point of when you're about to be hired, you let them know that it's your preferred name.
So this one is a tricky one. Thank you for the question. So this one's a tough one. So I have two answers for that. One answer is that, and this is, I'm going to say it's a challenge, right? If you won't want me based on my name, then I don't want to work there anyways, right? Like if a place if that's how they operate, that's probably not a great environment to begin with. I am speaking from a place of privilege because my name, you don't expect me. I would say so.
That's true.
Yeah. And I would the problem with that, I would say, is that it's not really, if it is a name that you go by, then fine, but you don't want to put anything that's not a reality. So I do know, for example, like certain cultures, like you'll have your cultural name and then there is like, we're going to air quote it, the English name that you'll use. But then like the last name is going to be culturally obvious, I will say, from where you're from. So, and you can't use a whole different name because then it's like, well, are you this person who's on the resume? Because this resume is kind of a piece of identification in a way as well. So, I would say it's not necessarily the best way to go. Personally, I haven't seen that either. Like I have seen like with the first name, there will be like sort of, as I said, the air quote English name, and then they'll have their cultural name as well. But then the last name is going to be of their culture as well. And as I said, like if a place is going to exclude you, I don't think that's going to be a great place to work. But as I said, that's speaking from a place of privilege, understanding that that is a challenge for many people. And this idea of having to kind of change a part about you to get a job, it bugs me. Like I understand it is difficult, but I think that like it puts you in a tough spot. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I honestly get you. But I'm looking at it from another angle. You
Yeah.
know, apart from the fact that, for example, your name, it's like you have a privileged name.
Yeah.
Another angle to look at it is that based on your level of experience in Canada, the more there's this common slogan, you don't have Canadian experience.
Yeah.
And for some people, it's a challenge to just
Yeah.
have somebody to believe in them.
Yes.
So at that point, I think if people consider it's fair in the sense that it's allowed, it's legal, and also once you start working for like 5 years, 6 years in Canada, you have the confidence and you're like, okay, if you don't like my name, I wouldn't rather want to work with you. But I'm thinking for starters, people that are just starting, if they want to use it, it's something legal they can use. You could have a preferred name. Also, because for getting a job, there are different stages. You know, the first stage is somebody or some set of people looking at resumes and picking out those they want to either call and talk to first or call for an interview. And maybe the next stage is when you get to the interview stage, other people will now come in. So if you want to bypass maybe the first person that would look at your resume and not discriminate against you based on your name, I would say anybody that wants to do that, I think it's fair. I'm just saying. In my workplace, I've got somebody that did that, and you know, it gave him the leverage to, you know, be interviewed. And once you get to the interview stage, then you can showcase yourself. And it's now left to them to say, wow, this guy can do the job, or I'm not just going to give him the job because of his name. But at least it puts you there to be able to showcase whatever skills you have. I'm just putting that out there. Sorry. Yeah.
No, you're teaching me because first of all, I didn't know that was a thing. Because as I said, like depending on where you're applying, your real name is going to come up eventually without you just using a name that's not yours. And it is, some people do have like aliases, for example, which you can completely use, right? Like that's perfectly fine. A completely different name, I would say no, because how do I know this is your resume? Right? Like there has to be some identifier linking it to, okay, this is you. As I said, though, like I am speaking from a place of privilege on this, so I am not going to purport myself as an expert on that. And I do understand the challenges that people face. Like one of the things you touched on is the Canadian experience. Very, very difficult, because how do you get experience? If everybody's like, hey, you need Canadian experience, where do you start? Right? It's very, very hard to like get that first opportunity. And, you know, that's part of why I really like personally, I always try to help people to kind of give them opportunities, because sometimes all people need is an opportunity to get them started, get them on their way. And it's not a lack of knowledge. It's not a lack of, you know, ability. It's just that opportunity. And some people have countless opportunities. Others don't even get one. So I understand the need to kind of just get your foot in the door. Just like somebody listen to me, somebody see me. So I do appreciate that. I do, you know, appreciate you bringing that up. As I said, like that's something that I hadn't heard of. Like I've seen it in a different capacity. But at some point there is the big reveal, right? And at some point, that is just something that like if someone is, say, discriminatory against people from a certain area, this isn't going to be a great environment, and they're going to be going into that interview with bias, and there's all these other challenges that are going to be associated with that, and that's the challenge, right, of you know, looking for a job when you're, I'm going to air quote, racialized. I hate that term, but that's a term that's used. That's part of the challenge, that you're kind of having to be overqualified and having to deal with all these other barriers that others don't have to deal with. And, you know, it's unfortunate, and that's the unfortunate reality we live in. And that's why it is important that, you know, people are doing their best and putting their best foot forward and really trying, because there's sometimes barriers that we don't see that we're coming up against. So, but thank you for that.
Thank you.
Is there any other questions? All right, so gonna go on from where I left off. So your work experience and your volunteer experience. So this is where you're really gonna want to shine. And this is where I think sometimes we go overboard, I will say. So first off, with both sections, you're going to want to start with your most recent experience first. And you're going to want to say like what your job title is and the time that you work there. So if, you know, maybe January 2005 to present or something like that, and you're going to list them in order. Be sure to put the proper tense. So if it's a role that you're currently in, I am doing this. If it's a role that you've already done, I did do this. And you're just going to go through and talk about the things that you've done in each role. The level of detail that you go into, once again, depends on what you're applying for, right? So if you're in a technical capacity currently and you're applying for a technical role, you're going to want to get into those technical pieces. However, if you're transitioning to a different type of role, you're going to want to look at it sort of more bird's eye view and break it down in terms of like competencies that you possess. So you can either do point form or do a paragraph. Either or is perfectly fine, but you should encompass your what you've done in each role. I break out work experience versus volunteer experience because volunteer work is typically different than a job that you're getting paid for. So you're going to want to have those as two separate sections, but your approach to each of them will be the same. Any questions there around your work experience?
Good evening. Thank you so much. Just want to ask, so for a lot of immigrants that come here, will come with like maybe some experience from back home, like 7, 8 years. And, maybe you want to work in the industry that you want to work, but maybe you didn't get the job like immediately and you just find to do some things just to pay the bills, right?
Yeah.
But those things are not really like the experience that you have back home, right?
Yeah.
So maybe you had like technical experience, but here you started doing sales job, or you had sales job back home and then started customer service. How do you put those experience in the context of, okay, they need Canadian experience, but the Canadian experience you have is not the industry that you really want to work. How do you juxtapose it?
So first off, so thank you for your question. Great question. I knew it was going to come up. So you're going to want to list all those experiences first off. So even your non-Canadian experience, put that on there. It is your experience, and you can still, even though it's not here, what I was speaking about before, like those competencies, those skill sets, you're still going to have that. And you're really going to want to highlight those. So not necessarily I did the specific job, but these are the skills that I used in doing that job. And when you approach it like that, where you did the work doesn't actually matter. So this is my challenge. This will be my challenge for everybody. When you're looking at how you're framing your work experience, you're going to want to look at it less that like I worked for this company and I did this specific thing. You're going to want to present it as, okay, this is my sort of project management experience. This is my time management experience. Like when you break it down in terms of, I'll say skills or tasks, it's not going to matter where you worked. These are those muscles that I was exercising in each of those roles. Same thing for your non-technical roles. Same approach. Like if you were, say, a cashier, let's say, you're having to deal with people, you're having to juggle multiple tasks, you're having to manage your time. These are all skills that are transferable to many roles. So when you're speaking about your experience, rather than saying, I was just a cashier, you're going to want to say, these are the skills that I was exercising when doing this role. So reframing your experience should help. Once again, that discrimination piece, it is the elephant in the room. It is a reality. You don't know where that lies. I will say some places are, yes, 100% discriminatory. Others are not. You have to present everything you've done, though. You have to put that on your resume. And sometimes it's just a matter of reframing it and presenting it in a way that's a little bit more tailored to what you're applying for. So I don't know if that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, no, it's a tricky one, but yes.
Yeah.
You got it covered, yeah.
And it's hard to do. It's very hard to do. You wouldn't be the first person that has a hard time with it. It's very, very, very difficult. Like I, for example, just probably about a month ago, finished a recruitment for administrative assistant on my team. And so there was a lot of people with experience in other countries. And I interviewed quite a few people who had experience abroad. And for me, it was actually fascinating because some of these roles that they had outside of the country were far surpassing the role that they were applying for, but the skills that they were exercising in these roles, it's like, oh my goodness, you'd be absolutely fabulous. Unfortunately, I only had one role at the time, but they're on the short list for roles in the future because they have those skills. And it doesn't matter where they worked, they have those skills. And I think people who've immigrated here are told too often that they don't have Canadian experience. Like that's all they're being told. And that does affect your psyche. I want people to start to try to think of it like, yeah, I don't have Canadian experience, but I have all this experience. And this is why you need to have a conversation with me. These are the skills, these are the muscles I had to use in doing this job. So kind of just approaching it a little bit differently could help. So try it out. I will say it's hard to do. It is hard to do, but it's not impossible. And you know, just sometimes we just have to change our approach a little bit.
Thank you very much. How did we reach out to you if you like maybe want to have like one-on-one session or something?
I guess so. Sure. I think I'm on LinkedIn. Yeah. I don't know if my contact information, I think my contact information was in the invite, I believe. So yeah, but yes, feel free. Thank you so much. Any other questions? Okay, I love a little silence. Let us all.
I think that's enough for now for the questions.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Perfect. So, education. So this is another piece that can be very challenging. So some people have a lot of school experience, and there's always the question, should I include it? Should I not include it? So I'm of the mind that you've done it, you should put it on there, right? However, once again, how you framed it. So what people do sometimes, they have a bunch of work experience, but because they have a lot of education, they throw the education at the top of the resume. That usually is what is tanking you, I will say, because that education piece isn't really the most important piece. It's actually your work experience. If you have no work experience, that's where the education becomes a little bit more important. Now, why I say that is that there are sometimes technical or educational requirements for roles, like, you know, minimum bachelor's degree, minimum PhD, anything of that nature. However, in terms of the actual work, the recruiter, the person who's hiring, they're still going to want to know how you do the job, and that's how you apply that knowledge. So the most important thing is not that you have the PhD, it's what can you do with that? So if you just put out front, hey, I got all these letters, all these things after my name, hire me, that's not really attractive to an employer, because it's not academia. First off, it's the workforce, and it does operate a little differently. So while that stuff is important, it's not the most important. And that's why you're moving it down a little bit in your resume when you also have work experience. Regardless of his work experience in the industry that you're applying for, you still have work experience, post grad like experience. So you're going to start with the most recent program that you've completed, and you're going to want to include like the name of the certificate that you've gotten, the school at which you obtained it, the year that you obtained it. If you had a thesis, for example, you're going to want to put that in there. The level of detail, you don't really need much if you have work experience. It's more that, hey, I completed this is the year I completed it, and that's it. I've seen GPAs, some people attach their transcript. All of this stuff is not necessary unless it's a role where it specifically says, hey, you need a 4.0 GPA or something like that. If it says that, include it. Most places don't care. They want to know that you graduated. That's it. So put that you graduated. So why I am distilling it like that is it's back to like just including the information that you need. You don't want to inundate your resume with all of this other stuff that's not necessarily relevant. While we're proud of our accomplishments, if it's not relevant, it really isn't needed, because you're taking up valuable real estate on your resume that you could be speaking about stuff that are actually relevant to the role that you're applying for. So anybody have any questions around education? Okay. So the next section is your credentials and your certifications. So here you're going to want to include anything, any additional credentials that you may have. So for example, if you've done like your lean black belt, if you got your PMP, things of that nature, and the year that you got them or when they expire. And you can just list them. You don't have to go into like detail what they are, because these are usually things that are kind of known in industry. So you don't have to like go through in detail, but putting that you've completed these, you've had these certifications, it's good to include that on your resume. And lastly, any other professional development that you've done. So for example, if you work for a particular company and they have like courses within the company that you've taken. So as I mentioned before, I work for the public sector. So they have different programs and classes in that. So any of those that I've taken that are relevant to what I'm applying for, I'm going to just list them at the bottom of my resume. And lastly, but certainly not least, references available upon request. Do not add your references to the resume. First off, you don't want to be sharing everybody's information all over the place, right? Because you may have applied to 50 places. You don't want to be farming that information of these other people everywhere. Also, they're only going to check references for people who are going to be considered for a position. Checking of resumes isn't of references isn't always an indication of a job offer. It is sort of the last stage of screening. So sometimes your references will be contacted, but you haven't actually gotten a job offer. So I know sometimes people think, oh my goodness, they're calling my references. I got a job. Not necessarily. It could be differentiating between you and another candidate. It could be shortlisting you for a future opportunity. There's many different things a reference check could include. So don't spam people with the references. They will request them if needed. So sometimes, and we'll get to this a little bit later, when you're going for the interview, that's when you're going to bring your references with you, but you don't need it on your actual resume. So just a statement at the bottom, references available upon request, is perfectly fine. Any questions? Okay, and last, and something that people often forget, page numbering. If you have a resume that is more than one page, you're going to want to just put like a footer with your name and page 1 of 2, page 2 of 2. Why this happens is for some companies, like if all of the resumes are collected centrally, they're saved as like one file. So when someone's reading through your resume and it's multiple pages, they have to know that it's associated to your actual resume. So just having that page 1 of 2, page 2 of 2 helps to know that this is all one document. So you can put that as a footer on each page of your resume. Okay, so that's it for a resume when you have work experience. So as I mentioned before, there is another scenario where you don't have any work experience. So we've all been there. You get out of school and you're like, hey, okay, I want to work. And, you know, there's that conundrum, like I don't have work experience. I'm trying to get a job, but they want me to have work experience, that kind of cycle. So you're going to have a similar approach to when you have work experience, but the only difference is you're going to sort of shift the order in which you're putting things on your resume. So you're still going to have your contact information and your summary of skills out front. You're still going to have your volunteer experience, credentials, references available on request. The difference here, though, is you've moved up your education, because now that education piece is going to be more important. And also relevant courses completed. So this is another way you can kind of pull out experience where it may not seem to exist. So relevant courses completed, let's say, for example, you're applying to a lab job where you have to do bench work. You're going to want to, in your relevant courses completed, include courses where you had a lab portion. And you're going to just mention that, you know, hey, you did labs in this and that. So you're not going to list every course you've ever taken. Not relevant, but you're going to want to list these key courses that demonstrate the competencies you need for the role that you're applying for. So typically your resume is going to be a little bit shorter when you don't have work experience, but you can still have a very good polished resume without that work experience. So any questions? Okay. All right. So another thing I want to touch on is tied to the resume is cover letters. Now I've seen online different, I'll say, ideas as to, do you need a cover letter? Do you not need a cover letter? Oh, I shouldn't have to write a cover letter. So cover letters are sometimes required. So if a company is asking for a cover letter, do a cover letter. oftentimes things are asked for and they're mechanisms of screening. So if something is asked for and you don't do it, you've just screened yourself out of contention. So what you're going to want to do is, first off, see if you need a cover letter for the role. Speaking from government experience, you do always do cover letter and resume. It's good practice, just like as your resume, to have a generic cover letter ready to go. And once again, this just kind of has everything, all your experience, and depending on what role you're applying to, you're then going to like move things around on that generic cover letter. So each role that you apply for, new cover letter. I've seen people apply for a job and they have the wrong job title on the cover letter because they've just sent the same cover letter everywhere. Don't want to do that. You're going to want to have a specific cover letter for each role that you're applying for. For a cover letter, 1 to 2 pages is more than enough. 3 pages is way too long. If you're at 3 pages, you're probably copying your resume verbatim, which is not necessary. So 1 page is pretty good. 2 full pages might be a bit on the long side, but anywhere between 1 and 2, that's generally where you're going to want to be. So with your cover letter, rather than just restating every single thing that's on your resume, you're going to want to expand on specific details of your resume that are relevant to the job that you're applying for. So let's say, for example, you're applying for a management role. What you're going to want to do is go into greater detail about your leadership skills. And okay, in this role, I was a leader and I did this, and this. But you're not going to talk about the dishwashing job because that's not relevant. So you're going to talk about the things that are relevant to the role that you're applying to in greater detail than what's in your resume. So you don't want to just redo your whole resume, because first off, it's going to be too long. And second off, that's not the purpose of the cover letter. The cover letter is kind of drawing the reader in to then go look at your resume, to look at your experience in greater detail. So what you're going to want to do in this cover letter is you're going to want to show how your experience aligns with the job that you're applying for. So instead of just saying, I did this, and this, you're going to want to make linkages to the role that you're applying for. So always kind of bring it back to, this is why I'm telling you this, because I have these skills that are related to this job. Any questions about the cover letter? Okay. All right, so the next stage of your career journey, looking for a job. So we've done all the work, we've got our resumes, they're absolutely fabulous. We're like, great, now I got to find something to apply to. So searching for a job is another stage that can be, you could feel challenging and daunting, but it's not impossible. So before you start your job search, you're going to want to have an approach where you're just not applying for everything, because, you know, if you apply for 900 jobs, you could potentially get 900 no's. That's bad for the psyche, right? So while you want to be not too specific, I will say, you want to give yourself the best shot at success. So obviously you don't want to eliminate too many roles, but you also don't want to just apply for everything that you see. So an approach to this can be sort of like a cost benefit, I will say, approach. So what you're going to want to do is, first off, think about what you absolutely have to have for a role. So what are your must-haves? So let's say it's location, let's say it's a salary, let's say it's even a title. And then you're going to want to think about, well, what are my deal breakers? These are things I absolutely cannot be flexible on. So could be location. If you like, I can't drive for 4 hours, so it can't be far, or I'm not going to work less than this money, things like that. And then you're going to want to identify what things you're kind of flexible on. So maybe you're flexible on your work hours. Maybe you're flexible on location. So you're going to want to highlight those things so that when you're looking for a job, you can kind of eliminate roles as they come up based on your list of must-haves, deal breakers, and what you're flexible with. So knowing those sort of circumstances, those, I'll say, guide bars to your search, you can then do a proper search that is narrow enough to sort of hit the things that you're able to meet. So, for example, if location is something that's absolutely a must-have, so if you're like, I have to work in Toronto because of responsibilities that I have, then only look for jobs in Toronto. Don't look for jobs in Vancouver because you're not going there, right? So if you know that that's a deal breaker, then you look accordingly. You're going to want to also not be too narrow. What people find sometimes is that they make the job search so incredibly narrow that they can't find anything. They're like, I have to work in this block, I have to do this, I have to do that. And then they just can't find anything. They'll find like one role. Especially when you're sort of trying to enter the workforce or when you're really, really, really looking for a role, it's better to be a little bit less picky. And then over time, as you get more experience, you can then be a little bit more picky, I will say, with the types of roles that you're looking for. So also, you're going to want to do a job search that aligns with your skill sets. So this sounds contradictory in some ways, but you know what skills you have. So let's say, for example, you're not a really good touch typer. You can't type that fast. Don't apply to be a stenographer at a courthouse because you can't type that fast, right? So you're going to want to look for jobs that really tap into the skill sets that you have. And this is where you got to be really honest with yourself, right? There's some things that you're really good at, and there's some things that you're not so great at. Be honest with yourself and apply accordingly, because you don't want to land yourself in a situation where you can't be successful or you can't be efficient, you can't be all that you want to be. So having that really honest look with yourself and be like, look, these are the skills that I have. What types of roles can I do with these skills? So any questions?
You have no questions for now?
Okay. Gonna keep moving. Had to take a drink of water. All right. So looking for a job, it's a full-time job. It takes a lot of work if done properly. It takes time, it takes effort, but it is 100% worth it. It can be very, very disappointing at times. It can feel frustrating, but you do have to put the work in. I'll say the job market now is particularly challenging as well. So, you got to put the time in at the end of the day. There are numerous platforms that you can use for the job search. I just listed a few here. So you've got LinkedIn, Indeed, Glassdoor, Monster, Workopolis. Many companies also have their own job boards. So what you can do for all of these platforms is set up job alerts. And typically the job alert, you're just going to put like the types of roles you're looking for. This is my salary expectation, things of that. And then you'll just be getting emails with jobs that hit that. When you're setting up a job alert, don't be too specific, because you don't want to not get alerts for jobs that may be relevant to what you want to do. But job alerts are very, 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 very helpful because it's kind of like a passive job search happening behind the scenes for you. And networking. So networking can be done effectively. You don't want to network solely for the purpose of getting a job, though. So, for example, you don't want to meet someone, like let's say at a conference or at an event, and right off the hopper, you're like, hey, do you have a job for me? It puts that person first off in a very, very awkward position because they don't know you. You are literally a stranger to them. And second off, it kind of makes a sort of a disingenuous connection. But what you want to do is naturally network, because you never know when opportunities could arise. But you want to be considered for those roles, and you want to be someone that comes to mind. And in order for that to happen, you do have to build a rapport with people and build some form of relationship. So networking can be very, very, very valuable. Most valuable if you're not doing it just for the sole purpose of getting a job. You can learn a lot from networking. You can learn about industries that you had no idea about. You can learn about companies that you didn't know existed just speaking to different people. So don't just reach out to someone you don't know explicitly for a job. Because I know for me personally, when someone sight unseen kind of says, hey, do you want a job? this is probably the last conversation we're going to have, because I'm like, I don't know you, and you haven't, why should I give you a job? Like, you haven't done anything. You haven't shown me anything. So you do need to build that relationship with people. So networking can be such a great tool when looking for a job, but more for like future roles down the line. So you've done all this, you've got your must-haves, your deal breakers, all of those things. So you've done that, and now you found a job that you want to apply for. So as we spoke about before in the resume section, you're going to want to tailor your resume and cover letter to the job. So for example, if it's a technical role, you're going to want to highlight those technical pieces that you're really, really good at. And if you're applying, let's say for a management job, you're going to want to highlight your leadership skills. But the takeaway is that whatever the job, whatever the role is, you're going to want to look at that job ad and align your resume to that job ad. On the topic of job ad, read the whole job ad. Now, I've seen this way too much, that people have clearly only read the top of the job ad. Why? Sometimes there's a question that you have to answer. I mentioned before that I did an administrative assistant competition, and we had a question in the job ad. So 1,100 people applied. Guess how many people answered the question? No one's going to guess. Less than 300. So out of 1,100 applicants, 800 people did not answer the question because they didn't see it. They saw the job, title, salary, and they applied, missed the question. And guess what? All of those people excluded. They're screened out because they didn't answer the screening question.
So Paula, just sorry to stop you here.
Yes.
So basically, you are saying that this question is basically for the robots. Is like is it like some kind of technical thing?
Yeah. So some places will do it using like an ATS. Many places do it when they're not using an ATS. So where I work, we don't always use those screeners. We actually go through all the resumes. So our first screen is, did the person answer the question? And there'll usually be like very explicit, like, include this in your application and it'll have the question. So if you don't have the question answered, you're screened out. So some screeners can be programmed to do that. It's a very, very quick and easy way to screen out people. Because as I said, 1,100 people applied for the role. It's so hard to screen that down, but so many people didn't answer the question. And even if they had fabulous experience, that was a screening question and you didn't answer it. So you're not considered. So you could exclude yourself just because you didn't read the job ad. Had you read the job ad and actually did the work of aligning your experience with what's in the job ad, they would have seen the question. So yeah, that happens. And it's a quick way to, I'll say it's a quick screening method that is employed sometimes.
Okay, well, thank you very much for letting us know more about that.
Yeah, hopefully that hasn't happened to anybody, but I've seen it. So yeah, and with the screening questions, it's usually not anything particularly complicated. It's usually just, tell why are you a good fit for this role, and they'll have a word limit as well. And these are all ways to see if you're paying attention, because almost any job you do, attention to detail is very important. So if you miss those things in the screening, you've excluded yourself already. So when you're going through the job ad, there's usually sort of keywords, key competencies that are relevant for that job. So you're going to want to have those in your resume and your cover letter. Now, caveat, don't just randomly put words in there. Like, don't just say a bunch of words that are on your job ad. It has to make sense, right? So some people, what they try to do is just literally copy and paste what's in the job ad. Even if you get through a screener, at some point, someone is going to read this resume. And if it reads exactly like the job ad, you're going to be excluded, because it's like, this isn't actually your experience. You've just regurgitated what's on the job ad. So you have to just be sure to not be copying and pasting. Rather, you're going to be taking your experience and saying, yes, I have these skills, but writing it in your own words. And once again, another example, same competition. One candidate was reading over their work experience, and they were referencing stuff at the place that I worked. And I'm thinking, this person has never worked here, and this job that they're talking about isn't here. What they did is they copied and pasted a portion of the job ad as their work experience. And so I'm reading it and I'm thinking, well, you didn't actually work here. This is a copy paste job. So once again, excluded because that's not your work experience. So people do those things to try to get past ATSs, but eventually a non-robot is going to see your resume. So the tricks don't really work. They might get you, past the screener, but at some point someone's going to read this and be like, this is not, this isn't who wrote this, whose experience is this? So you have to be mindful of that. So one other thing that, people kind of get stuck on is, oh, I don't meet every single requirement for a job. Don't worry about it. No one does, right? Any job that you go for, you will be trained. Regardless of how much experience you have, every role will have some type of training program. So you're really going to want to just look at how much of this job can I do? And the other stuff that I can't currently do, I can be taught. So don't exclude yourself just because you don't hit every single point. But if you hit a lot of them or even some of them, still you can throw your name in the hat. Avoid sending your resume everywhere. You got to be kind of selective. Now, going back to the screener question, clearly some people just click, send their resume everywhere. And then you'll see things like, they're addressing the wrong person, they have the wrong job title. You don't want to do that because if you don't put any effort into it, that's a potential no. And that's really going to affect your positivity. So you're going to want to be selective in what you're applying for, but don't be too selective. Selective with reason. And recruiters, they can actually be helpful. Sometimes people do go with a recruiter. It is a little bit of a different experience depending on the quality of the recruiter. And recruiters should not be confused with agencies because agencies operate a little differently. They get paid and things like that. Whereas a recruiter, some companies prefer to work with recruiters because recruiters are kind of screeners for them. Because recruiters will bring candidates forward. They'll say like, hey, this candidate has the skills, interview them. So don't be afraid of working with recruiters, but the recruiter has to be a good fit for you. So usually with a recruiter, you'll meet with them. And if you're just not jiving with them, don't work with them because you're not required to do that. You can always say no, but it is another tool that you can use in your job search. So any questions? All right.
Yeah, I think for now we don't have any more questions. So thank you so much.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so we've got a resume. We got a job that we want. We applied for the job. Oh my goodness, I'm getting an interview. So how do you now prepare for your interview? Prepare. Cannot say it enough. Prepare for an interview. One of the things that really tanks people is a lack of preparation. This typically happens when you're like, I know the job already. I'm good. I have so much skills. So they go into the interview, and they do absolutely no preparation. When you do that, you're not setting yourself up for success. You want to put the work in and really work at doing a good job. So be flexible with your interview times. The interview panel is typically going to have multiple interviews and they have a schedule. So try to make the time that you're scheduled for. I come from a time where you didn't ask for a different time. You have an interview, that's the time you got. You got to make it work. Unless there's extenuating circumstances like you're out of the country or you have a medical appointment, something, make the time. If it's like, oh, I prefer to not be in the morning. Oh, well, that's when your interview is going to be. So make sure that you are flexible with the time. So some companies are flexible with the timing, but a lot aren't. So as I said, you should try your best to make the time that you're given. Another thing people fail to realize is that if you need any supports, you should ask for them. We are in a day and age where people are more aware of differing abilities and different things of that nature. So if there's any supports that you need in the interview process, it's up to you to advocate for that. So bring it forward. You know, kind of similar to what I was talking about before, if a company isn't really cool with that type of thing, that may not be an environment that you want to be in. So just be very forthcoming with any accommodations or anything of that nature that you will need in the interview. Research the company that you're interviewing for. So many times people go to an interview and they know nothing about where they're requesting to work. Not a good look. You want to be able to speak to like the company's values and the type of work that they do. So simple way to do that, visit the website. Usually they have like a mission statement, have an idea of like the types of things that the company does, and kind of familiarize yourself with the business. So this is good to first off, see if it's a business you even want to work for, and also to see if, you know, it'll allow you to kind of ask certain questions in the follow-ups, which we'll talk about later, if you do have some knowledge about the company. Practice speaking at a pace that allows people to write. Now, I speak very quickly, and I think I'm doing that today, but you want to speak at a pace that people can transcribe your answers, because your responses are usually going to be scored, so they're going to be transcribed. Some people do record them as well, but even then, like if somebody's speaking very quickly, sometimes it's hard to keep up. So try to speak at a pace that is easily transcribable. With that being said, do not speak like a robot, because that's very hard to listen to. So you want to kind of speak at sort of a natural flowing pace that allows for the person to get all that good stuff that you're talking about. If you don't say it in the interview, it didn't happen. So many times in an interview, people are like, oh, well, you have my resume and your cover letter. Okay, cool, but I may have read like 50 others. So if you don't mention it in the interview, it's not going to be part of your response. The resume, cover letter, that was all screening. The interview is a different aspect of the hiring journey. So you're going to want to speak to those things again in the interview. So don't just assume that they remember everything from your resume, because most of the time they don't. And be mindful of how much detail you're providing in your responses. So if, for example, you work for a company and they have this like really specific application that they use in your company and no one else outside your company knows about that, do not go into detail about how that thing works, because no one's going to know what you're talking about. Instead, you're going to want to talk about it high level. This is the program that I use. This is what it's used for, and that's enough. But going into the detail of like what's happening on the back end and all this stuff, it's not relevant, and the interviewer is not going to know what you're talking about. So you don't have to go into that level of detail. Probably the most important thing in your interview is using strong examples. Sometimes people use terrible examples for questions. And it's a terrible example when you finish talking and you're like, what was I talking about? And what was the question? That means it wasn't a good example. So you're really going to want to use examples that answer the question, that really talk about what they're trying to get to the question. So a strong example will always beef up an interview response. Avoid using the word we. So yes, you have to be collaborative, but I'm interviewing you. So I don't need to only hear about what all of you did. I need to know about what you did. So while you can use we, you also have to bring it back to what you did in that we. People always do this. It's a hard thing to do for some people too, because if you're very, very collaborative, you're going to always want to say, oh, my team, my team, my team. Great. But what was your role in that as well? Because as I said, you're the one who's sitting in front of the interview panel saying, hey, I'm the person for this job. So you do have to talk about the skills that you have as well. And wrap up your examples. So sometimes people, they give a great example and then there's like no ending. They don't stick the landing. And it's kind of like, well, what was the point? So you're always going to want to wrap up your responses with the outcome. So for example, if the question's talking about this, project that you worked on, okay, well, what happened with the project? Was it successful? Did it create a new workflow? Whatever the case, but you're going to want to talk about that and wrap it up. Recent examples are preferred, but not necessary. So sometimes you got a really, really great example, it's from like 20 years ago, fine, but more recent examples are always going to be the preferential ones because a lot has happened in, let's say, 20 years. You may be a different person even. So you're going to want to try to have responses that are most recent. But at the end of the day, whatever example best speaks to what the question is asking, that's what you're going to want to use. And also ask for clarification if needed. So sometimes, there's a question that you're being asked and you're like, I don't really get it. Rather than just starting to talk, hoping that you're answering the question, you can ask for clarification or to ask to hear the question again. Any questions? Okay, so we'll keep moving on. So follow-up questions. So sometimes the interview panel will have follow-up questions, but the lack of follow-up questions doesn't mean that you had a terrible response. Sometimes it means that you answered the question. And the thing with follow-ups is that for them to be fair, everybody that's interviewing has to have the same follow-up questions. So typically the follow-up answers that you're providing aren't really speaking to like the meat of your response. It's more like curiosity on the part of the interviewer, but don't be thrown off if there's no follow-up questions. Trick though, and even though I said there was no tricks, some places provide questions in advance, like a day in advance, for example. And of course, AI, right? People will take those responses, feed it to the machine, and get an answer. So a way around this as an interviewer is to ask follow-up questions, because if that is your answer, you're going to be able to elaborate on your answer. But if you've just fed it through AI, you won't be able to answer a follow-up question. So that is a little trick that's done sometimes just to get around that inevitability of people using AI at times. You're going to want to budget your time when you're providing your responses, so don't go too long. You have a certain amount of time for your interview. So let's say you have an hour and you've got 5 questions. You're going to want to, in your mind, know that, hey, I've got this amount of minutes for each response. With that, you don't have to use the whole time. If the interview is an hour and you finish in half an hour, fine, because maybe you had succinct answers. But don't just talk for the sake of talking, because for the interviewer, it's like, oh my goodness, this is a lot of talking. So only talk if you have something to talk about, but don't fill the time in fear of, oh, my answer is too short. If you said what you had to say, that's good enough. If you're joining an interview virtually, always check your technology. You don't want to be fumbling with that before the interview. You don't want to be joining late because your technology doesn't work, because that gets you nervous and then you're not going to perform well. So you're going to want to practice that your tech works. Dress appropriately. So some people come to interviews and clearly they've prepared, they put their best foot forward. Don't wear your pajamas. Don't wear anything that's revealing, no swearing, things like that. You want to dress professionally and appropriately. And lastly, and this is something that people kind of forget, be yourself. They're hiring you as a person with your skills and also your personality. And some of my most enjoyable interviews and most meaningful interviews have been with people who I'm like, I get a sense of who you are as a person as well. Because if you think about it, you're going to be, most cases, joining a team of people, and you want to show that, hey, you know what? Shoot, I'm a good fit, and you're going to be able to work with me. So you want to let some of that personality shine through. With that, don't make it the comedy hour or be cracking jokes left and right. I mean, a joke here and there is fine, but you still want to be serious enough and professional, but be yourself. And if you're being yourself, you'll be more relaxed and you'll generally perform better. Okay, so now I'm going to go through a few kind of just generic questions that you'll encounter in interviews. And I'm just going to go through kind of things that you can include in your response, and then sort of things that you definitely should not say. So one type of question that you're often asked is, why are you interested in this role? So why are you interested in the role, and why are you an ideal candidate? So in your response, you're going to use some of that knowledge that you got when you researched the company and talk about how what you have aligns with what the company does, and their values and their standards and things of that nature. You're going to want to also talk about like your interest in the core business of the company. You're going to want to outline your career progression and experience and how this role aligns with that. And you're going to discuss your top skills and how those skills align with the key competencies for the role that you're applying for. And lastly, you're going to want to share an example of your top skills from the past experiences that you have and show how they're important to this role. So what you're not going to want to do is say that it's money. Don't say that, because, you know, even if it's painfully obvious, don't say that, because that's just not a good way to present yourself. Don't say that the job's a foot in the door. Once again, even if that's the inside voice, don't say that, because me as a hiring manager, I'm going to be like, well, this person's going to be gone at the drop of a hat. So don't say that. And don't not do research. Always do research on the company, because you want to go in with some idea of the type of company that you're trying to work for. The next type of question you can obviously get in an interview is a technical question. So an example of a technical question is, tell us about a specific technology and your experience in using it. So in your response, you're going to want to talk about how this technology works, sort of the theory and how it's applicable in industry. And then you're going to want to provide an example of how you used it. So you're going to want to talk about where you used it, in what capacity you've used it, what functions you performed using it, and how well you can use that type of equipment. What you're not going to want to do is say that you've never touched it and then just have no context, like, I've never used that machine. Instead, what you can say is that it is a learning opportunity. I do not have experience with this. However, I've used this, or I would really like to learn it, and just sort of reframe it as a learning opportunity. If you do have experience, don't get into the weeds. So while you should kind of describe how it works, don't go into way too technical detail. Do not become a textbook of it, because chances are the people who you're talking to know how this machinery works as well. So you don't need to go into that, great of a detail. So just enough detail to show that you know what you're talking about, but not the whole theory, like from the beginning of time, on how it works. Any questions so far? Okay, paused for water. So we'll keep going. Teamwork. So as I mentioned before, like usually when you're applying for a role, you're typically going to be joining a team of people. So there's usually teamwork type questions. So one question could be, to tell us about a project that you worked on with a team that did not go as planned. So in your response, you're going to want to talk about this project that you worked on, how it was relevant, and who was involved in the project. You're going to want to outline how this project was executed. You're going to want to talk about your role within that project. And you're going to want to show what happened, so sort of the course of action in dealing with this unplanned outcome, and including your specific role in doing that. And then you're going to finish up with the actual outcome. What you're not going to want to do is only talk about the team. So what I was speaking before, that we. Okay, great, but what did you do? And complain. You're not going to want to complain about the other members of the team and be like, oh, this didn't work because so-and-so did this and that, because that shows that you're not really a team player. So you're not going to want to do that in your response. Another type of question that you often are asked are conflict type questions. So tell us about a time when you had a disagreement with a colleague. So in your response, you can identify who the colleague is, not by name, but sort of the nature of your working relationship. You can talk about the nature of the conflict and what created this conflict. And then you're going to want to talk about how you approached it. So either you address it directly with the person, and if that didn't work, you looped in management if it was severe. And then this is really, really, really important. You're going to want to talk about your own personal reflection in this situation. So you don't want it to be like, this person was wrong and they did this, they did that. You want to show some emotional intelligence by saying, this was sort of my role in this conflict, and this is like what I could do better, and this was my approach. So you want to kind of do that. You want to show that you've done that, that sort of self-check. And then, as always, you're going to want to have an outcome. So have a conclusion on, what happened with your approach. So what you're not going to want to do is, in your example, say that you ran to management. This is a nightmare for managers, people that will just, the first sign of trouble, they run into the office. You want to show some ability to be able to resolve this problem on a personal level. However, if it is something very extreme, very egregious, then yes, management should be your first step. But your regular kind of day-to-day disagreements you may have with people, you're going to want to show that you can kind of try to resolve those on a person-to-person basis. You don't want to show a lack of self-awareness or responsibility. So you're not going to want to be like, you know what, I didn't do anything wrong, it was this person's fault. And lastly, never say that you didn't have a conflict. We've all had some level of conflict. It won't be, it doesn't have to be a fist fight, doesn't have to be a full argument, but some type of conflict or disagreement. So saying that you've never had one does kind of show that you may not be aware of situations, surroundings, and things of that nature. Time management questions. This is another type of question that you'll often get. And an example of a question would be, how do you deal with completing multiple high priority tasks? So in your response, you're going to want to talk about your thought process, your approach to these multiple tasks. And then you're going to want to talk about the skill sets that you have that you use to approach this problem. You're going to want to, in your example, confirm with either a supervisor or manager what task is the highest priority. You're going to want to show your communication with your team or stakeholders. You're going to want to talk about how you've communicated this information to your management. And then you're going to want to provide an example of when you did this from either work or when you're in school. And in those, you're going to want to talk about the outcome of that. What you're not going to want to do is, in your example, have no communication with anybody. That means you're working in a silo, which isn't desirable as an employee. And you're not going to want to not talk about your thought process. You want to show how you approach problems. So you're going to want to walk the interviewer through kind of how you're approaching that particular situation. And this is a type of question that's really hard, but it's asked sometimes, the weakness question. So what is your greatest weakness? So if they're asked for a weakness, don't start listing all the things that you're bad at. Okay, because that's not desirable. You're going to want to have an example. So some examples of sort of good weaknesses to talk about is having a hard time saying no, or challenges in working with certain personality types, or being hard on yourself sometimes, or being your own biggest critic. The takeaway here, though, is that you're going to want to frame your weakness as a learning opportunity and as something that you are willing to work on. So a growth opportunity, not just a straight up negative. So what you're not going to want to do is use a weakness that reflects poorly on you. So for example, I really have problems with authority, or I can't work with other people. These are things that would be like, okay, thank you for your time. We don't need to hear anything else. And don't say that you have no weaknesses, because no one's perfect. We all do have weaknesses. So you're going to really want to think about those things that you could do better. So after you've answered all your interview questions, if time permits, usually you're able to ask, a follow-up question or two. So it's courteous to do maybe one or two questions. I've had some, interviewees who've asked like way too many questions because they have time, and it gets a little tiring for the interviewer. You may be like the 5th interview they've had that day. So, be considerate of their time. So ask maybe one or two good questions. You don't want to ask any questions that are like way too personal, because once again, you don't want to put the interviewers in a weird spot by asking them something a little bit too personal. Also, you're not going to want to be asking about roles that aren't the role that you applied for. So let's say you're applying for an entry-level position. Don't start asking about management positions in the interview, because that's not what you're interviewing for. You're going to want to ask questions that allow for succinct answers, and as I said, that aren't too personal. And if it hasn't been told to you already, you should ask about the timing and next steps in the interview process. So this also shows that you're interested in the role. You want to know what happens next. So as you remember before, in our resume, we have that references available upon request. So typically, once you've gotten to the interview, you're going to have to provide that list of references, and then they'll reach out to them if they're going to be thinking about making you an offer. So some companies, they may, contact the references of the top 5 people, top 3 people. Some only contact references for the person who's going to get the offer. It really depends on the place. You want to ensure that the people you've put down as a reference know that you're a reference, and that they're aware that you're going to be sharing their contact information. So it's a good practice to let them know that you've applied to this role and that they may be contacted as a reference. As an interviewer, it is interesting when I reach out to a reference and they're kind of like, I don't really know that person that well. That's not a good reference. So you want to be sure that you're using people that can actually speak to your experience and that can actually, speak favorably of you. And be selective. Not everybody's a good reference. You want this person at the end of the day to provide a favorable reference for you. And you don't want to use people who can't really, speak to you. So for example, you don't want someone who you just worked in the same building, but like you didn't really have any interactions with them. They won't be a good reference. But someone who's worked closely with you, like say a manager or colleague, these are all people that could be great references. And then after you've done your interview, you've done great, you've given your references, you feel, absolutely wonderful. You're going to want to thank the panel for their time and mention that you are appreciative of, being considered for the role. It's good to send a follow-up email. You can either send it the same day or the next day, just, once again, thanking them for the opportunity and for the consideration for an opportunity. And be patient. Don't email them every single day. What about now? What about now? What about now? It takes time and they'll reach out. They haven't forgotten about you. One follow-up is generally necessary. And if there's multiple candidates that they're interviewing, for example, the whole process is going to take a little bit of time. So you do have to be patient and always request interview feedback. Even if you get the job, request feedback because no one's perfect and there's always things that we could do better. So getting that feedback are more tools that you can put in your tool belt for future interviews and future opportunities. So always ask for feedback. All right, so the last little section that we're going to talk about is the intelligent use of artificial intelligence in your job search journey. So AI is an inevitability. It's everywhere. The robots are taking over, as some people will say. So we want to be able to use these tools effectively. So when used responsibly, AI is a really, really great tool. It can offer writing support. It can help you gather information, so many things it can do. But the key is that it's a tool. And any tool, you have to know how to use the tool. So, if you have a hammer, don't try to use it as a screwdriver, right? You got to use it as a hammer. So AI, when you use it effectively, it can really be a benefit to you. So with that being said, don't copy and paste what you find in AI because the same prompts are going to give you the same responses. As, someone who screened a lot of resumes, I can look at responses and know that it's been through AI. One of the giveaways is that multiple resumes sound the same cadence, sometimes even same formatting. So like if you're copy and pasting, chances are your resume and cover letter is going to be the same as someone else who's applying for the same role. So don't do that. You can use it as sort of a basis from which to develop your resume cover letter, but don't copy paste because that's lazy and that's not going to help. So with that, ATS, so applicant tracking systems. So this is a hot topic as well. Many companies do use this, and you'll see a lot of people, guaranteeing you, the opportunity to get past an ATS. So larger companies use this, especially if there's a lot of people applying for roles, because the reality is it's really hard to read through hundreds and hundreds of resumes. So what you should always do anyways in your resume is have key words. So these tracking systems, they're doing it on keywords, and a good resume will have those keywords in there anyways. But as I mentioned before, even if you get past the screening, there has to be content behind it. So don't just blindly put together a resume made up of buzzwords, because eventually someone's going to read it and be like, well, this is foolishness. This doesn't say anything. So you're still going to have to put that work in. So you want to, at the end of the day, have all of your skills and your experiences in your resume, but you're also going to want to pull in those keywords, because going back to like looking at that job ad, you're going to want to be aligning your skill sets with what's in the actual job ad. So we've made it to the end of the presentation. So I will open the floor to any questions anyone may have about anything we've talked about.
I do have a question myself.
Okay.
It was really about the references.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that the references they must be part of the company. There must be people that were, in the capacity to give a reference.
Mm-hmm.
So is it also possible to get a reference from a company if they are themselves the past company that that person was working for, where themselves are facing another company?
So yeah, so your references they don't have to be, they should be people that worked with you, typically.
Okay.
So wherever, so typically, if possible, a reference would be like somebody that you reported to and then somebody that you worked alongside. So it doesn't have to be only managers or supervisors, or if you're like a manager applying for a role, it can be someone that reported to you. But it has to be someone that can speak to the skills that you say that you have. So they can work anywhere, but they just have to know you enough to be able to speak to what you've spoken about.
Okay. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. So thank you very much, Paula, for that beautiful presentation.
Thank
We
you.
are going to wait for the messages, for the questions in the chat.
Okay.
Please, guys, don't be shy. Paula is here. She's very motivated. As
Am
we are
I?
all on. Yes, we are waiting for your questions.
I have a quick one though.
Yes.
Regarding to references,
Mm-hmm.
does it matter what email address your reference gives you? Can it be a personal email address, or must it be an official email address?
Either or, whatever the best, they have to give an email address or phone number that they'll actually respond to. Because I've seen sometimes that people, they give a reference and then contact information, and then you can't contact the person. That's why it's good to kind of touch base with whoever you're putting as a reference, and then just have them let you know the best way to reach them. Because some people don't like email, they prefer a phone call, right? So you should, whatever is most comfortable for the person who is providing the reference. I know nowadays, like when where I work, we send an actual reference form, so we email that. But some people don't want their email address given out, so then I just do a phone call and ask the questions and write the responses that way. So whatever works best for the reference is what you're going to do usually.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else?
Hi, Paula. Thank you
Hello.
so much for the presentation.
You're very welcome.
So my question is with regards to the cover letter. I'm not
Yes.
sure if you already touched on it. Some job ads request for cover letters. So
Yeah.
I wanted to know if there's mandatory to add it or not add it. Does this sort of reduce your chances of getting the job or increase your chances of getting the job?
So you can add it if it's not asked for, you can, but you don't need it. Some places ask for it specifically, so it's more important that if it's asked for that you include it. But if it's not asked for, you can also include it. That won't like disqualify you from the job, because it does actually show that you've done extra work at minimum. And I personally, I like a cover letter with the resume, because it just speaks to different things that your resume won't necessarily get into. So it kind of adds like that extra oomph to your experience. So if it's asked for, 100% do it. If it's not asked for, you can do it. Where you just have to be cognizant of is if there's a page limit. So if they're like, hey, your application's got to be 3 pages, then you may not want to waste a page on a cover letter. Do you know what I'm saying? So it really depends on what's being asked for. But I think like most of my experiences in the public sector, and you always need a cover letter there. But in private, some companies even have like an actual application form that you fill out, and then you attach your resume. So it really depends on where you're applying. But if it's asked for, do it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Sorry, if you don't mind, I have another question.
Yes.
And this question is regarding if one gets an maybe an email for an interview specifically, and sometimes when you get such emails, you other people that will be on the panel to interview you would be in that email, just like everybody on the panel. Is it appropriate, just like one normally goes to learn about the organization that sends the interview mail, is it appropriate to also like search the participants of the panel, like going to their LinkedIn profile and reading about them? What's your take on that?
So, great question. So I would say this. Most people go to LinkedIn regardless, right? Like even panel members, sometimes they will search on LinkedIn. That's just a reality. You can, but I wouldn't ask anything specifically to those people, because oftentimes you'll have a hiring manager and then like 2 other people that aren't, you won't necessarily work with them. So knowledge of them isn't really relevant. They're just 2 other people on the panel. So it doesn't necessarily add value to do that. I'd more focus my time on like the company as a whole, because you may not be working with those people at all. So it's, it kind of won't necessarily help. But as I said, with that being said, people, to get an idea who you're going to talk to, we've all done searches, I guess, so it doesn't hurt. But I wouldn't then be like, oh, I saw on your LinkedIn profile, blah, 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 blah. I wouldn't do that. Right. So I'd say you don't have to do that. That wouldn't really be helpful.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anyone else?
Hi, all.
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation and the information that you provided.
Okay.
You talked about the location bias, where like specifically in the government job or other companies. So let's say I'm in Toronto and I find a job like in Montreal or BC. Then I think the job I may be a fit, or I'm interested in working on that job.
Yeah.
What would you suggest for me, like, since I'm located in Toronto, for the address? Do I have to find an address in the Montreal or BC in order to avoid this bias?
So I would say, first off, you never want to provide information that's not real, right? So if you live in Vancouver and you're living in Montreal or whatever, that's your address. I would say that you may not want to have your address to begin with, like on your resume, but at some point in the application process, you may have to provide that. What companies do sometimes is say, like, are you willing to relocate, for example? But that doesn't mean that they're going to relocate you, but it's like, are you willing to relocate? And this is a tricky one, because it's hard to there are so many barriers that exist sometimes that you don't necessarily know they're there. And with the location, it does become tricky because, as was mentioned before, companies won't necessarily relocate you. And so they're going to be thinking, well, if we hire this person, how are they going to do this job? So I wouldn't put an address that's not your address. First off, wouldn't do that. Don't want to lie. But that may be an instance where you won't necessarily put your address, at least on your resume. If it is asked for, though, you're going to have to provide it because you don't want to lie, right? Like we don't want to do that. So I'd say leave it off the resume, but when asked for it, you will have to provide it. And I know that at least in government roles, like you aren't supposed to discriminate based on location, right? And some people have come up with, interesting ways to kind of determine where people is. And it's not for, it's more like, can they get to the office? Can they get to work? It's not like, oh, I don't want somebody from that area. It's like, oh, do they live too far? And there's questions that are sometimes asked. Sometimes they'll have the interview in person. So it's like, you got to be able to get to the place. So things of that nature, because in the reality is you should not discriminate. That 100% the case. We all know that there are people who are discriminatory. That's just an unfortunate reality. And these are some barriers that are often thrown up in the background that people aren't aware of, that shouldn't be there, but do often exist. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you so much. I have another question.
Yes.
During the application, sometimes they ask to self-identify either you are person of color, black, something like that.
Yes.
Given that there might be some discrimination based on their ethnicity, what do you suggest to not do the self-identification? I feel sometimes it's optional. You either have to do it or not.
So usually there's an option, prefer not to answer, at least nowadays, because one would ask, why is this important, right? Like at this stage, I wouldn't, once again, I wouldn't lie, obviously, but if you're not comfortable sharing, then I'd prefer not to answer would be what to do. I know personally, I always put it because, as I mentioned before, if this is going to be a barrier, then I don't want to be there, right? Like that's not going to be a space that I'm going to want to be in. So if me being me is a problem, then this isn't the place for me. And this is a thing that I think is tough even for job seekers. Like sometimes it's like, you so want a job, right? And it's like, oh, I'm willing to work anywhere. In reality, you're not going to want to just work anywhere, right? Like you don't want to unknowingly put yourself in a situation or in an environment that's just, not healthy for you. Because yes, we all need money, but we don't want to be, harassed or feel uncomfortable and things of that nature. So what the approach I always take is that, like, if me being me is a problem, then that's not the space for me. And there will be other spaces. So long-winded answer.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the answer.
You're very welcome.
That's very helpful.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hello. Good afternoon.
Hi.
Thank you for this wonderful section.
You're welcome.
Have two questions to ask. So one is about getting an email for an interview. Like replying to that email, what's the best way to reply? Like getting an email which attached some other maybe interviewers. Should one reply like directly to the person who sent the email, or also acknowledge others who were attached in the email?
So reply all usually, but address the person who sent the email. It's a good practice because, say, for example, someone's on vacation, somebody didn't see the email. So everybody on that email, you can just reply all. So the people who were copied, for example, or who didn't send it, it's an FYI for them. And then the interviewer is the person that or usually like an admin will send the interview invite anyways. So you're going to want to, it's a good practice to reply all. It's helpful. I know from being an interviewer, it is helpful when I'm copied on the response, because on my end, I'm seeing, okay, who's available for the interview, so I know what my schedule is going to look like. But oftentimes, like, an administrative assistant is the one who's sending out the interview request, and they don't always copy the hiring managers. They kind of do it in the background. But if they're everybody on the email, just reply all. Unless, and there's a caveat, sometimes in the email, they tell you exactly how to respond. Sometimes it'll be like, reply to me with the response, or reply all. That detail is sometimes given. So it really just depends on the situation. But without any direction, just reply all and address the person who sent the email.
Okay, thank you very much for this clarification.
You're welcome.
And the other question I would like to ask, I didn't get your explanation very well when you were explaining about not using agencies and just using recruiters. Can you please expatiate on that a little bit? Like,
okay,
what do you mean agencies are bad, or
so a recruiter is different than like a like, I guess they're called like a staffing agency. So like a staffing agency will like send you to different workplaces. For example, you'll see this typically with like maybe like factory roles or things like that, where you need people for maybe a couple of days. That's different than a recruiter. Like a recruiter will often have clients, will say companies that don't post on job boards. They use recruiters to get applicants. So you apply to like the recruiter, and the recruiter will say, hey, there are these companies that are hiring, there's these jobs that are available, and they kind of pre-interview you in a way and match you with the job that you can then interview for. So that recruiter will then present your resume, cover letter to the company, and then the company will decide if they want to interview you. So that can be helpful to have that, because recruiters sometimes have access to companies that aren't on your typical job boards, because some companies just don't want everybody applying, so they just use recruiters. So you'll see like on like say Workopolis, for example, it'll have like it'll be like a recruitment agency or something. So you'd apply to them, and then they'd reach out and they'd find out what type of role you're looking for, and then they'll say, okay, we have these companies that have jobs. And then so they're kind of like an intermediary in a way. So they can be very helpful, especially early in your search. They can be kind of helpful. I find, like, for example, for me personally now, I don't use them, but I don't necessarily air quote need them right now, but they can be helpful because they're kind of searching for you in a way. So it can be helpful.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I also want to add just one more, because I saw some and they were requesting for SIN. Is it okay to give it to them, or because I've had cases where people say you shouldn't give anyone your SIN and all of that?
Don't give them yours. They don't need the SIN number. Is only needed when you're hired for a role for taxes and payment. So the recruiter doesn't need that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Hopefully that's actually a recruiter.
That's true. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Anyone else? Well, I think we're at time, so I guess I'm going to hand it back over to the host or someone.
All right. I really appreciate you, Paula, for all the great messages, the great presentation that you have shown for us. Guys, we are really thankful for all of you for having been present for this meeting. And if you are interested in learning more, please join Black Engineers of Canada. We make a lot of meetings at for this type of subjects, and we are really happy. It was a pleasure to have everybody. And again, thank you so much, Paula. It was a great presentation. It was it was really for people that were not really, were not really used to getting to do a walk getting a job in Canada, but honestly, you surpass our expectations.
Thank you.
I found myself taking notes.
Yay!
So thank you so much. Thank you so
thank
much.
you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you.
So without further ado, I'm going to say goodbye to everybody, and I hope to see you. In one of our next events.
Sorry,
Please join the Black
Saidin.
Engineers of Canada.
Can I ask one question before I leave? Will you be getting a copy of the presentation, the PowerPoint slide presented?
So I typically don't share my slide decks, but what I can try to do is maybe put together like something a little shorter, just like with some pointers on it. I might be able to do that, which I guess I don't know how we go about sharing that though, but yeah.
I believe if you can do that summary, we can just email it to all the participants. We have their emails.
Yeah, okay, so we can do that. So look out for that probably in the next week or two. I could probably put something together for everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, guys, and have a great rest of the day. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.